So I guess I want to start with a question, and that is, how many of you are familiar with scholarly publishing, peer-reviewed, premier journals like Science and what? Well, that's good. That's good. So there's several that aren't, but that's actually more than we had even hoped for. So just for the background, for those of you that didn't raise your hand, so scholarly publishing is usually it's part of the academic process. So someone is going through doing research, they're working in a university or a setting, and they're often writing papers, submitting them to high-tier journals, like journals that you would know, like the New England Journal of Medicine, that almost anybody would know, as well as many, many, many journals. But the high-tier ones are the easier ones to have someone relate to. And in that process, those articles are processed by editorial boards. They are peer-reviewed, and they go through this process to becoming vetted and finally published in a journal, hopefully. Many of these journals, by the way, if you look at something like the New England Journal of Medicine, reject about 96% of the articles sent to them. So, and they're not all like that. They vary in rejection rates, but it gives you a little bit of an idea. And to give you a little bit of an idea about the environment, now we're not talking right now today about large commercial publishers like Elsevier or Wolters Kluwer, Wiley, but we're talking instead about a lot of the Society Association nonprofit publishers. In particular, they're the ones that are looking for scholarly publishing platforms. And these organizations are very interesting because they often have a component of a membership component. They might have educational components. Some of them, like for example the AMA, they'll also do things like have codes or databases or things that are important to their industry. And then they have a publishing program. Now, for many of these organizations, their publishing program is their bread and butter. It is their revenue generator. So they may be mission-driven organizations, but they keep the lights on. They keep giving people grants. They keep lobbying on Capitol Hill. They keep doing many of the other things that they might do because they have a vibrant publishing program. And often, though, they don't necessarily have depth in IT resources, either in the publishing program itself or even in the entire organization. So they're faced with the dilemma of how they're competitive with their products in a digital form and in other other forms, even many of them come from print, and the resource constraints or maybe a lack of expertise and competencies in certain areas. There are exceptions, and one of the things we're going to talk about today, and as I turn to the panel here, we have representatives from the major platform, scholarly publishing platform, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second, providers, as well as someone who is in a society, in an association that does maintain their own publishing platform. And so as a little background, and I wrote this down so I didn't forget anything, when you think of a scholarly publishing platform, we're talking about a full-service online and mobile content delivery platform, and it includes most, if not all, of the following things: web content management, content enrichment, access control, monetization options, so things like advertising, new product development, e-commerce, having compelling user features, the whole user experience, as well as reporting and analytics for very diverse audiences. The same organization is most likely serving institutional subscribers like librarians, as well as individual subscribers or members that may or may not be associated with an institution. They have to know who's where, what access they're allowed to have, which of their rights provides them the most access to content. So access control, even though it's just a small sentence in here, is actually a very intricate thing in this environment. And so today we're going to hear from Tom Rump from Highwire Press, who's on the end over there, Joy Moore from Silverchair, Kevin from Cohen, from Adderpond, Louise Russell, or Tutton Russell, which one? Russell, sorry, she just got married and she's confusing me, from Publishing Technology, and Jerry Greiner from IEEE. We'll start by letting them introduce themselves, and then hopefully what we'll do in this session is give you another perspective of what platforms or platform means to a publisher, and in this case, a scholarly publisher. But I think you'll see some crossover in some ideas. So, Tom, you want to start just by introducing yourself and Highwire for a minute or two?
Sure. Good afternoon. Tom Rump, I'm the Managing Director of Highwire Press. What we provide is an innovative electronic publishing platform for the scholarly community. So we have a combination of the platform as well as the peer review system that Ann mentioned. An example of our clients would be Science, PNAS, which are the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which would be more single journal-focused societies. We also have larger publishers such as Oxford University Press and Sage Publications. And then we also have a whole group of folks who are smaller societies with single journals. So we produce them online only. We're not in the print business. Our value proposition is around our Highwire Open platform, where we allow, with APIs, to give control or access to many third parties as well as the publishers to do the technology that they'd like to do. And also we have a high customer support facing team to help the publishers, especially now because the publishing community is changing considerably. And what is important to also note is that we are an auxiliary business unit of Stanford University.
Hi, I'm Joy Moore, and I'm the Chief Product Strategist at Silverchair Information Systems. Silverchair has a long history of being I guess you could say, it started off as a boutique online publisher for clinical textbooks. And through the years, we've really focused on developing rich semantic tagging that enhances the ability for clinicians to narrow in and find content related to their daily practice. And over the years, we've noticed the need for this type of technology, as well as new platform features and functionalities within the journal community as well. So last year we launched our SCM6 platform, and it's been growing ever since. We just launched a new journal today, the Annals of Internal Medicine. And our focus is really working with a smaller and select group of society publishers who are looking to diversify their product development strategy, and using the platform tools as an underlying basis to grow their business in new and different ways.
Kevin?
Hi, I'm Kevin Cohen. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Atpon, which, depending on who you ask, is a made-up Greek-sounding word or an ancient legal word that means not printed or just atypical. Actually, you can ask the same person, the CEO, and he'll give you 3 different answers.
He's Greek.
And he's Greek. The majority of our business is in scientific and scholarly publishing, New England Journal of Medicine, the American Chemical Society, JSTOR. These are all clients of ours. But we also have a lot of business in the trade and consumer publishing space. So the Financial Times is a client of ours. Pearson Education is a client of ours, McGraw-Hill. So actually, if you go to the Financial Times website and you're denied access and you're asked to pay, they're using our software to manage that access and commerce environment. And the thing that we focus on more than anyone else, and what you'll hear from all 4 of us, is that there are a lot of things that we do that are the same. We sort of tick the same boxes, and we all have our areas of focus. We focus the most on monetization options for publishers, so a very wide range of licensing models for the publishers to sell their content. And one of the major differences between what happens in scientific and scholarly publishing versus a consumer publishing or trade publishing is that most of the selling is done to large institutions, to institutional libraries. And that presents some different challenges as opposed to the consumer space, and that's a lot of what we focus on.
Hello everyone, I'm Lukas Russell, Chief Operating Officer at Publishing Technology, responsible for our online solutions division. So that part of the company focuses very much on providing services to scholarly publishers. So we have 2 main platforms, one called Pub2Web, which focuses very much more on providing standalone, custom, more sophisticated technology to publishers, and then a second platform called Ingenta Connect, which caters very much more for the longer tail of 1 or 2 very small, lower budget publishers. But in addition to that, at Publishing Technology, we provide a broad range of software and services that cater for content management, audience development, and content delivery needs. So in addition to providing online platforms, we also undertake market research, We provide content sales representation internationally for publishers, and we also provide a range of back office enterprise solutions that manage publishing processes such as fulfillment, rights and royalties, distribution and production. And in that area of the business, we work with a mixture of scholarly trade and education publishers. So overall, we work with about 450 publishers, and I suppose perhaps one of the different areas for us is that we're truly international. We have offices in the UK, the US, China, Brazil, India, and that's something that's a bit different that we bring to the table in terms of what we can provide to our platform customers and understanding of local markets.
Good afternoon. I'm Jerry Greiner. I'm Director of Publishing Technologies at the IEEE. And we are, in addition to being a 400,000 member organization for electrical engineers and computer scientists, we have a very large publishing program. We publish 125 peer-reviewed journals in EE and CS, in addition to 1,300 conference proceedings annually. And we package that up on our own platform. I guess I'm the black sheep up here, the only one who does it myself.
There's time to come to the good side.
Right. We'll discuss that through the next 40 minutes, I guess. But you know, we package that up into a platform that we named IEEE Explore, and we sell that content, access to IEEE Explore, to corporate libraries, academic libraries, government libraries, and also access to our 400,000 members as well. So I'll be, I guess, representing the lone view up here of the company that took on the platform and has no plans to switch, at least right now.
That's why you're here, Jerry. So I thought maybe we would start with the basics. And the first question that we spoke about on the phone is, why do publishers leverage commercially available platforms? And in your case, when considering your answer, Jerry, why don't you? Would anyone like to volunteer? Why do you have publishers coming to you? What do they want you to do for them?
The start of Highwire was specifically driven...
Why don't you move the mic closer to you?
The start of Highwire was specifically driven by folks who wanted to move away from print and move to an electronic only circa 95, 96. So publishers had begun to come to us to say, hey, I want an option to put all this content online rather than to stay in the print business. One of our first publishers, JBC, celebrates 17 years in 2 weeks, has gone now from print and online to online only. So a lot of publishers come because they really want to come out of the print business, but more importantly, why they choose a commercial platform, if you would, is because they don't have the technology nor the expertise to really drive that, and would rather take the resource investment they have towards new products and supporting society members in a different way.
Well, I'll actually say that I think that the reason that most scientific and scholarly publishers have outsourced to vendors like us is because most of them were not in at the very start. So Jerry was with Wiley when journals first started. I'm right about this, right? Was with Wiley when journals first started going online, and he was sort of instrumental to getting Wiley. John Wiley and Sons, big. They have a major STM publishing division, if you don't know, and he was sort of instrumental to helping get them online for the first time. And if you look at the large scientific and scholarly publishers who are developing their own platform, and they're all large because it becomes a cost thing, very quickly. They all have at least one person who is still there, who was part of making it happen in the early to mid-90s. And without that, you really don't have the ability, without that in-house expertise, to build the program, even if you wanted to invest the amounts of money that it would cost to actually do it internally. So I find that typically the publishers who are succeeding doing it themselves, they have one or two key people that you can point to and say, they really understand it beyond just having read the news and talked to the experts. They are the experts. So,
I think too, Kevin, you make a good point, right? But the larger publishers, and I would include IEEE in that category, also have a lot of resources.
Yep.
And the IEEE, you have to understand that one of the E's in our name is engineering. And it was without question when we made the decision to build a platform that we would do it ourselves and actually model my group actually as a startup within the company. I was hired actually to build that within the IEEE, and we sort of got locked into our own platform. And I think that's another issue right now is whether or not we ever make a decision to flip over the lock-in costs that we have now and the institutional memory that we have on the internal staff, which we're very fortunate in central New Jersey to have just a great hiring market. We're still 45 miles outside of New York, and so which is a commuting issue for some people, and it's a great immigration market for East Asians, and so we have a pretty limitless labor market. But I'll have to say, that being said, we've had very low turnover. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty much been a no-brainer once we started this thing up to to keep it going.
Well, in our case, as the relative new kid on the block in this market, our customers have been on the web in there since the mid to late 90s, and they're looking for a change. In many cases, they're taking, because of the challenges that are going on in the market, which are too many to go into right now, they're looking they're looking to the future and saying, okay, we have all these digital assets, we have books, we've got journals, we've got newsletters within the environments that they haven't been able to really take a long-term vision, and so they're looking to us for new technologies, new strategic opportunities, and new ways to build their publishing programs online moving forward. So
you don't need to feel compelled, but you're welcome to join in.
I think the only thing I would add is I think there's always that cost-benefit analysis, and a lot of the feedback we get is that publishers want to focus on publishing, their core competency. That's what they do. They don't want to be worrying about how technology is evolving and keeping up with all those trends. So I think, for a certain bracket of publisher, that's a significant concern.
Actually, I'm going off script here because you just brought something up that is one of my personal pet peeves, which is interesting. So I completely understand the idea of outsourcing certain aspects of technology. Completely makes sense. However, one of the things that I find as a consultant is that oftentimes some of my clients don't really believe they need to know anything about technology. And I patently disagree with that. And the same way that they knew about books, even when they didn't print them, they understood the technology, they understood the user interface. And I'm just curious if any of you would like to comment on that. So you get to own the whole tamale, you and your whole company, but do you find as a provider that people are trying to use you as their technical brain?
I would say it's probably a mixture. I agree with you that I think it's really important that publishers have on staff people who understand the technology, understand the trends and what that means for their particular business, their discipline, and that's vital, I think, for making sure they get a good service and they define their digital strategy with their partner well. But it isn't always the case, I would say, and that's a really important piece to make a platform successful.
Absolutely. I mean, and what we're finding as well is even though the platform and the websites are kind of the end of the game, working with our society publishers through the process of designing and transferring to their new websites goes all the way back down into the organization, all the way to basically all the way back to editorial. And so what they're finding in the process is that that we're guiding them in ways that really are much deeper technically than just the end result of getting their content out to the world on the web.
Yeah, I think it might help just to contextualize. I see some. I'm not wearing my glasses, so it might be my eyes that are glazed over, but it might also be yours. Just to contextualize this for you. So if you go to sciencemag.org, that's the Science Magazine website. That's Highwire Press. If you go to jbjs.org, that's Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery. That's Silverchair. If you go to negim.org, that's AdPun. And if you go to OECD.org, that's Publishing Technology and IEEE, Explore. But just to give you an idea of what our organizations are doing, including Jerry's, behind that domain, actually everything that you're interacting with, the search, the access control, all of the logging that's being done on the back end, all of that stuff is being done by the software that we develop. But we're also hosting the software, and some of these websites are very large. You know, JSTOR gets into the hundreds of millions of sessions every year, and we're supporting the software, and we're customizing the software. So it's what we do is not really software as a service in the sense that Salesforce is software as a service, you know, software in the cloud. It's much more in depth than that. And so, you know, the way that I would answer the question of are publishers looking to outsource the technology, or are they really going sort of, you know, out of building, out of mind, or do they keep some stuff internally? I think it's very challenging to be able to keep enough in-house skill to develop the software. That's the most difficult thing to do because there's a lot of intellectual property that goes into developing this complex and innovative software. But hosting websites that get this large is also extremely difficult, and you need to know how to tune. You know, it's not just let's buy more hardware because the traffic is going up. You approach problems that are, you know, very difficult to solve. And then comes the, well, what is my strategy in terms of using technology? And I completely agree with you there. A lot of publishers make the mistake of saying, well, I've outsourced the software I've outsourced the software development and the hosting, and while I'm at it, I'm going to outsource thinking about how I'm going to be using that software to advance my business. And that's where, you know, publishers sort of go off the rails. That's a big mistake, I think. So.
Tom, it seems like you wanted to say something. Go on.
I could talk all afternoon about this.
Don't worry,
but I'll confine the comments. I agree with everybody because the challenge that we have, some of our publishers who are well invested and understand technology and publishing are great to work with. They have a strategy at the society level. That your strategy has key business initiatives. They then have some what we call a technology roadmap, intersects with our technology roadmap, and the relationship is fabulous. We also have some people at the opposite end who really say, I don't want to pay any attention to technology, you just do it. And both of those work really well. It's the people in the middle who either know they have to have some technology capability, but they take someone who's an editor or someone who's in sales and marketing, and they have that individual as the interface with the technology partner, and it doesn't work because we end up spending a whole lot of time explaining to them the technology. They don't understand it. They then come back and say, well, we're the technologists, so we should understand it. That's where the challenges come, where the people who are partially or uninvested in really understanding the relationship. Similar, I was fortunate to have worked with Cognizant doing outsource work, and the best relationships were when we had a key contact in-house who understood the methodology, the business practices, and the approach, because they then could translate for the rest of the organization. And when someone doesn't have that, it becomes really challenging.
Jerry, I'm curious, in your position as an internal startup, what's your position as far as how technical do you want the people you interact with to be, given you're the owner of the creation of the technology?
Well, that's a great question, right? Especially in nowadays where we've moved towards an agile Scrum environment, it's really neat to, so agile and Scrum, right? We get together in teams that include technical people, business people, IT infrastructure people, marketing and sales people, and it's great to be able to transfer some of that technical knowledge to them, right? And pass that along, and you can see that the synergy that builds that have between those teams after you get that going is really neat, and it's a bi-directional thing too. That the technical people are picking up on business concepts, sales concepts, etc. So it's there's been a lot of technology transfer throughout the company that starts within my group.
So, and we spoke a little bit on the phone about the concept of control, and I think that one of the things we spoke about was how that was a very big driver for IEEE to say, that you wanted a certain level of control. By putting yourself as one of the platform providers and all of you kind of thinking about this, where's the line? Where's the line between what you should control and what you want your customer, internal or external, to be able to control?
The line is going to vary, obviously, from customer to customer. But one way to look at it is it needs to be drawn on an individual basis where each party is adding the most value. When it starts to creep too much either way, that's where things start to get messy. And so the ideal situation is to give the customer as much control over the processes that they are the experts in, and maintain the control of things like of the technical ramifications of the platform that are going to be most successful. So keep the software and the UI design in the hands of the experts. Keep the editorial decisions, the product development decisions, the marketing decisions in the hands of the publishers, and it'll vary. Some really want to be very high touch, and some don't. So you have to have the flexibility to span the spectrum, but also know on a client by client basis what that line should be.
Also, we're of the view, because we have two different sides of the business. We've got the scientific and scholarly business, and then which is that sort of full stack that I described, and then we have these trade and consumer publishers. They're using another one of our products, which is an enterprise software product. It's like buying a product from Oracle or IBM or something like that. They get the product, they install it internally, they develop on top of it. And actually, Jerry used that one of our products there for IEEE Explore. And our view is that more and more the entire scientific and scholarly industry is going to be shifting in that direction, because the separation between publishing and technology is really disappearing very quickly. Which does not mean technology is publishing, but publishing is increasingly what you are doing with your content using, with technology. So we really need to get out of the way. Right now, we're not just developing the software, and we're not just hosting it, we're not just supporting it, but every time that a customization is required, we have to, not every time, but most of the time, we need to be there in between the client and the completed solution. And what we want to do is we want to remove ourselves so that they have much more control. And I see that the industry is going to be going in that direction. Not for everyone, but for a lot of the bigger ones.
I would just reiterate what Joy and Louise had said, which is people should invest where they have the best skill set. Louise described it as control. If that's what your issue is, control, that's fine, but then you should be constant. If your skill set is publishing, you should work on publishing rather than technology. So it's that balance.
Right. Well, I see myself really as a general contractor almost in building my platform, right? So the technology that I use from Kevin's company actually started off in 1999 as a small startup in New York City. We were customer number one, and then Kevin's company came along and bought them, I guess about, 5 years ago, 4 years ago?
3, 4,
yeah. And actually, to this day, an employee from Kevin's company is embedded within my group to specifically deal with access and authentication issues. Likewise, we don't have our own search engine. We built our first platform using Verity and used Verity Professional Services to help us develop our search, and then migrated that over to Endeca Technologies, and again, used their professional services group to help us do that, and actually had one of their people embedded into our group and transitioned that person over to our employment a couple of years later. So, there are some base technologies that we just wouldn't dare build from the ground up, right? The UI was built around BEA WebLogic at one time, and we focus on that user interface. That allows us also to focus on the business packages. We feel that we've using our access and authentication system of building some great products and slicing and dicing our content down to very, very small degrees that we sell to specialized small startups, for example, as opposed to Boeing that buys the whole package. We must have about 250 different sort of product offerings within the platform.
So you bring up a very good point, Jerry, and I wonder how much the rest of you are really evolving toward being a general contractor. Many of you use MarkLogic, you use open standards, you use you have partnerships with Temis and other kinds of other companies. And I'm curious, do you see an evolution toward what you're really outsourcing is general contractorship as opposed to the components that lie under that?
I would say I think it's more than being a contractor. I think if you're a platform provider, you have to be presenting a vision of what this product is and why you've made certain choices in terms of the technology that you're using and where that's going to go next. So I'd say there's more of a value add than being purely a contractor there. So,
but Jerry's doing that for internal departments,
exactly,
and you're doing that for multiple publishers.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like an architect. If you're a general contractor building a house, the architect has the vision, the functionality, the value proposition, but they are not growing lumber, having forests
right.
and growing trees. We use, standard technology, whether it's Temis for semantics or FAST for search. So we plug those in because I don't want to create. We don't do search well in terms of technology when you have a platform you can just use.
So one of the things we spoke about a little bit too is we've been talking about the difference between an institutional sale or subscribers, that an institution that's using your services and an individual. And one of the things we didn't mention is that in these environments, and it's very similar, I think, to even legal or tax in some respects, but when you start to get into STM, you get very, very goal-oriented people. These are people that need to be productive. The access to the content that you're providing, whether it's produced by your organization or by your publishers' organizations, they want to increase productivity. They're not into a whole bunch of bells and whistles that don't get them what they want faster and better. And so I'm curious, how do you deal with some of the diversity in the audience, where you may have a librarian who's trying to manage all these institutional users, you have a physician, you could have a scientist, you could have a researcher, someone in an academic environment, and even though they're all goal-focused, their goals are quite diverse. And you have a suite of tools, but one basic interface to that cadre of different needs and jobs. How do you handle that? What do you do to help your customers, whether they be internal or external, reach those audiences? Go on, Louise. She's jumping.
When you figure that out, let us know.
Well, I was just, from my experience, the application of the technology of the platform has to vary depending on the audience, the different discipline that you're working with. So in order to get to that point of deciding how you best apply that technology, we use a mixture of different techniques, whether that's sort of doing market research, focus groups, actually spending time observing what people are doing, what they like, what they don't like, and feeding that back in. So it very much then becomes a UI and interface approach to make sure actually, if you're a physician, as Anne mentioned, you're getting answers quickly from trusted resources. If you're a librarian, you can integrate resources with technology, do what you need to do quickly and easily. So I think understanding your audience really is the key to make sure you apply the technology properly.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll just expand on what Louise said a little bit. It's interesting, again, because we're in scientific and scholarly and trade and consumer, to compare the two. Scientific and scholarly publishers have, since the moment they went online, been very good at charging for content. You really can't find too much new scientific and scholarly content that is available free of charge. Whereas on the trade and consumer side, every newspaper went online and made all of their content free. But on the other hand, when you look at targeting individual users and really understanding user behavior and being able to profile users, that's something that scientific and scholarly publishers have not done historically, and for the most part, they're still not doing it today. Whereas on the trade and consumer side, that's how they make all of their money, by understanding who the users are and selling ad revenue, making ad revenue based on that information. And it's funny because now scientific and scholarly publishers are having a bit of a paid content challenge because there are government mandates to make research content free, but that's another story altogether.
That's for another conference.
That's for another conference, and after some of those martinis from last night.
In about 2 weeks, actually.
Exactly.
But the point is that scientific and scholarly publishers really need to start monitoring who their users are And one of the things that we do is we have this tool called Smart Groups, which pretty much works like smart playlists in iTunes. You specify a bunch of criteria, and the system is tracking the user behavior, which might sound a little creepy, and maybe it is, but it allows the publisher to target messages to the users based on whether they have a subscription or not, based on whether they're reading very heavily on a topic or not, things like that. And I think that all publishers have to do things like that because they're going to be under that paid content battle even more than they are right now. And you really need to know who you're dealing with when you get into that.
So we also had, go on, George.
I just want to add, I think that one of the things that we're focusing on now is realizing, and Kevin alluded to this, that governments are mandating that researchers post their papers online for free if that paper was funded by a government grant, free 6 months after it goes up on the publisher's site. So we fearing that idea might gain some traction, we're looking at a decreasing value in our content and an increasing emphasis placed on the services that we put on that content. And there are companies out there right now that are doing that are aggregating metadata from all of the major publishers. Mendeley, for example, is a company that's doing this, where a researcher sets up a Mendeley account, searches across all of the publishers that are certainly at least represented here and at the IEEE and many, many, many more, and finding, getting search results. If they have access to that content through the publisher's website, they're able to link to that and download it. But the important thing is Mendeley is giving them a workspace, a workgroup space. So more and more we're looking at mimicking services like that, so we can be ready at some point in time to change our value proposition.
The other kind of complicating factor about this industry is that the people who pay for the content are not necessarily the people who use the content, by and large. I mean, there are different combinations across different areas of STM, but primarily the funding is coming from librarians, and they are purchasing access for their patrons across the board, whereas the people who are actually using, the end users, are the individual researchers and physicians and academics. And so, going back to your question of how do you serve these diverse audiences, it's an ecosystem whereby usage by people who are not necessarily paying it is driving the decision for the people who are writing the checks. And so we have to keep the people who are writing the checks happy, because what they're really looking for is the analytics. What they want, the information about how what they purchased is being used. And then at the same time need to provide a very compelling, easy to use, quick get in, get what you're after front end interface for the people who are actually consuming the content.
Another topic we spoke about, which I found your answers quite fascinating, was how is it that you decide how you're going to enhance your platform? So what are the factors that go into those decisions? And just to keep this in the back of your mind, as a follow-up question, we're going to talk about what you do when you have roadmap contention, where maybe there's something you think is really big and important, and maybe your publishers don't. And maybe you would add the word "yet" after that. Oh, Tom, start.
Okay. How we decide what we want to put in our platform, we use very typical approaches. We have user groups who participate. We have 150 publishers who provide us that information. We have a spot on our community forum where they can put in our product hopper new ideas. We've also used more and more recently the Stanford University system, where we bring in researchers. Typically the price is only pizza for lunch, and then they're really happy to come, and then they share what they're really doing in their labs. So we use all of that input. We then validate it with what we see in the marketplace, because customers are always right unless they're not. So we try to pull all that together, and we do have, in some instances, roadmap contention, because everybody would say, boy, we want all these new features, and they should be free. Or they'll say...
You get that too?
Yes, they should be free. And then what we also get is people who would say, well, I really like that feature, You have it for first half of next year. We want it now. And typically what we do is we say, if you'd like that, we're happy to do that, but you're going to have to pay for it as a custom opportunity. And we have resource flexibility to do that.
So what you're saying is if you stick to our roadmap, you're going to get it in your product.
Correct.
And if you don't, you're going to have to pay a premium.
Correct. And then it becomes a business investment decision.
Well, IEEE is not immune to that, actually. Even though we have our own platform, we have the big split within our organization of individuals as represented by the membership part of our organization, and then the institutional users, which are sometimes quite different demographic, right? So we have quite a large sales force, and we have something called a client services group that goes out, and at any one day we're probably putting on a user group. We have 4 user group meetings in the world, in Asia, Europe, North and South America. But also, too, we have a very robust membership a development group that nurtures student chapters. What that allows us to do is to hear from quite a diverse set of end users. Members, young members, student groups at 18, 19, 20 years old, 21 years old. They want to work quite differently from the 46-year-old engineer at Boeing. So now we have conflicts because the member people come back and say, you're not doing enough for the younger people. But then we say, well, we butter our bread with the older people. And so we still have those arguments in-house. And we have quite what we call a stage gate process to try to, rationalize some of those arguments. But it doesn't always work, and no one's ever happy.
And then you just throw a dart at the wall? No.
Oh, well, yeah, kind of, but we take a long time to throw those darts.
This reminds me of an implementation that we did for a large client. I won't say who. A number of years ago, and there was this giant board in the war room, the implementation room, at their office, and there were 200 Post-it notes, different colors. I don't remember what the colors meant, and I don't think that anyone knew what the colors meant, but there were different colors and things scribbled on each of these Post-its, and they were in different columns, on the wall, meaning different levels of progress or different levels of severity, or sometimes both. And in this one meeting, we sort of separated them out. These were the ones that were going to make it, and these were the ones that weren't. And there were more that were not going to make it, than were. And there was this gap in between the two. It was about a foot wide, and I just got up with a magic marker and drew these 2 lines and wrote, the Grand Canyon of Despair. And I went out to go use the restroom, and, I came back, and someone had drawn with a different color marker, a little bridge. It said the Bridge of Hope. And I think clients are often looking for that Bridge of Hope, and of course we're looking at the Grand Canyon of likelihood. There's only so much that can be done in a certain period of time. And so we end up asking, basically 3 questions. Client comes and says, we want to add this feature. We want you to add this feature, is what they say. And we say, well, is the answer to any of these questions yes? And if so, then it's something that's worth pursuing. And if not, you should probably forget about it. Is adding the feature going to increase usage of the content? Is it going to cause people to use your content more? If the answer is yes, it's a good idea. Is it going to allow users to find content more easily than they can find it right now? And if the answer is yes, it's a good idea. And if the feature is going to help you, the publisher, monetize the content more effectively, so if it's going to be a revenue generator, then it's a good idea. But you'd be surprised at how often a client comes to us and they say, we have this idea, and we ask them those questions, and they say no to all of them, and we sort of, and then turn around and, well, we don't turn around on them and walk away, but they get the message very quickly that maybe this isn't what they should be thinking of. And
they do get that message, Kevin.
I know they do. But it's an effective way to create expectations.
Kevin has an alias in some states.
I think it goes back to what Tom was saying earlier about who the decision makers are within each publisher, and if you can ask different people the same 3 questions, but if if you're getting your marching orders from somebody, an editorial who's just interested in what their competitor journal is doing, these three things don't matter. And then it also comes down to who's paying the bill at the end of the day. So if it's not going to drive usage, if it's not going to drive revenue, in some cases, is it going to provide a bad user experience, or is it just something that's there to have? Ultimately, are you going to do you really want to pay for that? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is going to be no.
Fair enough. I was thinking too that if you have questions, please, at any time, feel free to ask. Does anyone? I have I had 3 hands pointing that way.
I've spent time in both the scholarly publishing and now the consumer publishing areas, and it might be interesting for the group to hear where there's been crossovers from scholarly to commercial or consumer publishing. For instance, it's my impression since librarians are funding these products, they brought into publishing a great emphasis on metadata from their cataloging background, and that has crossed over into perhaps the consumer publishing area as well, since I realize now that I'm in it, metadata is really valued there. Do I recall correctly that Google was, the 2 founders were advised by Stanford University? So there might be some interesting crossovers between the information world that you're publishing into and the consumer.
I think
incredible.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that we were talking about before. In that, what can we learn from each other? And definitely, scholarly publishing is very strong in the standard in terms of standards and structure. I mean, the basic journal article has not changed since the first journal article was published, and there's a good reason for that because of the way the information is consumed, the way it needs to be connected with databases and things like that. And so there's a very rigid structure. However, I think sometimes scholarly publishers forget that the same researcher who is looking for an article in their journal, that's also a human being who's using the web in other ways and who's also reading magazines and newspapers online. And I think one thing that scholarly publishing might start to learn from the consumer world is the process of iteration, and that there's been a reluctance to change interface or to change how people access content or manage content. But then if you look in the consumer world, things are changing every day, and they're refined. And they might not be perfect on day 1, but they'll be better on day 2 and on day 3. So that's what I'm looking forward to, hopefully seeing more of that.
Yeah, I think that the chances of consumer and trade publishing taking much more from scientific and scholarly than it already has is not very good. And the reason is, as Kara discussed in the morning session, there are these big platforms with a capital P, right? Apple, Google, Facebook, and Amazon, who are targeting the consumers directly, and they are revolutionizing, and they're going to continue to revolutionize how consumer publishers, newspapers, magazines, and trade books, paperbacks and hardcovers, are bought and consumed by individual people. But we're selling through these institutions for the most part, and the App Store, the Apple App Store, just cannot handle that model. None of the app stores can. None of those platforms can manage our business model. But there's a lot that we can learn from the consumer space, and I'll give you a specific example. The Financial Times and then the New York Times launched this business model called the metered model, where you get a certain number of free accesses. And at first glance, scientific and scholarly publishers would say, no way, we're not going anywhere near that. Because if you land on, for example, the New England Journal of Medicine's website, and you do not have access through your institution, and you don't have an individual subscription, it says, well, you need to pay, I don't know what it is right now, but let's say $30, which is not atypical, and in fact, that's a small number for a lot of scientific content. $30 to access this one PDF. And So when you go to a scientific or scholarly publisher and say, well, why don't you consider giving away some of this for free? They say, oh, it's called pay-per-view. We have to protect our pay-per-view revenue. We can't possibly do that. But look at the other side of the equation, which is how many people are you shuttling right back out the door? You know, user does a Google search. They come to your site by clicking on that link. They see that $30. They click the back button. You've lost them. You haven't lost them forever necessarily, but you've certainly lost them for now. Across all of our hosted clients, we turned away hundreds of millions of users in 2011. That's a waste. So we took that business model, the metered model, from the consumer space, and we brought it over to the scientific and scholarly space. And institutional investor, Euromoney Institutional Investor, is one of our clients. They publish this very expensive financial information content. But now if you go to their site, you can access a certain number of free articles every month as part of a metered model, because it's a way to capture information about users and to create some engagement where otherwise you would be kicking them. So
we have one more question, and then
this has all been very fascinating. I wonder if you could share what the trends have been in terms of print to digital sales off the websites for either member publishers or, Jared, in your case, I noticed you have this deep backlist and you're selling everything in both PDF, I think, and digital. Do you see, you know, triple-digit growth in the change from print to PDF? And then the follow-up question is, PDF is hard to read on mobile. Do you find the devices that your folks are using are mainly laptop?
Kevin wants that one, I know.
I'll answer the first part of that question.
Have a chart.
I think the industry in general has seen an explosion in eBooks, right? So IEEE has a huge backlist of monographs, right, that didn't necessarily play very well initially when we launched our platform. But I think 2 years ago, we put that backlist up you know, for access through IEEE Explore, and sold that as a separate package to the libraries, and also gave our members actually free access to those books, backlist, and the sales have just wildly exceeded our early estimates. And I think that rings true through much of the STM, you know, the STM business.
If you have a business card, I have a chart from Outsell Consulting that maps print and electronic crossed over 08-09, and the gap is widening. And I only expect that will continue because of the heavy cost of print. And also, as I'll say this carefully, as the younger scientists come on, they're not interested in print at all. And that gap will only continue on behalf of electronic. When I say electronic, it could be full text online.
Yeah, I think a discussion that's going on in the industry now is, when do we kill print? We don't necessarily have that serious a discussion within the IEEE at this point, but it has to happen, I think. I walked you know, down the corridors of the IEEE, and they have, you know, these racks of the newly published journals, and they have great covers, right? You know, drone missiles on the front, and the four-color covers, and they're really neat, right? But I mean, they're more like brochures, and I kid with the editorial people. You guys should just print out a 4-page brochure for every issue and just hand them out the library, and basically serve as an advertiser to the online version, because nobody is actually using them. And an anecdote that I heard a few years ago from a librarian at the Los Alamos National Labs is that you know, printers polybag journals, and it was a standard practice to open those poly bags and put them on the shelves, but this librarian cleverly chose not to open the poly bags and said, you know, no one touches these things. So.
I think just going back to the PDF point, though, I think that's quite interesting, just because what we're seeing is that researchers in particular want that PDF so they can download it, keep their own local copy, share it, which is controversial in itself sometimes, but I think in terms of a format within the scholarly space, that's not going away. Other formats have other uses, whether they're discovery, viewing through other devices, but the PDF is fairly well entrenched.
So, and we do have to end up, I just want to tell you that last week at STM, there were researchers there, and they were just completely dissing the PDF, saying, we don't want it, we can't stand it, we can't line up our images with the text that it belongs to. So it's just really funny. I think it's a matter of time. I think it is what it is because that's all that we have. But on that note, I know we're kind of out of time.
If you promise to be quick.
Well, as the first thing, we don't have time, but I'd love to take up on your offer, Kevin, and talk a bit about the open access stuff. As an industry policy guy, I'd like to go there, but not now.
That makes one of us.
I'll give you
Just kidding. I'd love to talk to you.
The question is, it would be useful for me to understand how are publishers making money on journals? You know, you talk about the old print model, which I'm just shocked to hear that you're actually debating when to get rid of it. It's shocking to me, but that is what it is. Is the money being made on like a selling of a journal subscription, like here's a subscription, or is it more shifting to buy the drink, buy the article, $30 per article, and in a kind of combined it? I mean, are those statistics measured and stuff, and other industry metrics on that?
I would say Jerry's probably the...
Well, we sell, we have a number of models, right? So the first model that the big technology companies use is access to everything, right, by IP address to the site. And then we'll sell, specialty packages of, particular journals. So if a company is interested in, RFID antenna research, for example, they might get our antennas collection, both in books and journals. We do a modestly small, a rather small business and paper review, or what we call single article sales downloads. But mostly we try to package either put together specialty packages, and or the broad access to everything within the platform.
As a kind of quick sum up, because we're out of time, I would say, and anybody can nod here and tell me if they think I'm crazy, if you had to guess, more than 60% to 70% of revenue is coming from institutional sales.
Yeah, subscription.
Yeah, and I think that's very conservative.
Much more. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank all of you. This is very interesting, and thank you for the insight. Thank you very much.